Great, thanks, Pam. Yep, so this is one that will need a motion, one of two today. And this is a policy item, so not development, so a little bit different from a lot of what we usually see at HAPL. So this is to discuss specifically the draft guidelines for the proposed Lewis Street Heritage Conservation Area in James Bay, which is the second of the citizen-nominated heritage conservation areas that we're seeing through the process. There was a few draft motion options in the report, and when we get to that point, Justine can probably pull it up. So this is the proposed boundaries of the Heritage Conservation Area. It includes 14 properties, 15 buildings, because one property has 2 homes on it, as well as a parking lot and Lewis Park. 4 of these properties were already designated homes, so those will continue to be considered heritage homes under the new Heritage Conservation Area. And then we're proposing adding a further 6 to the Heritage Register to also be heritage properties within the Heritage Conservation Area. And 4 properties will not be considered heritage. One of them is the property that contains the 2 homes. So technically 5 homes, 4 properties rather, will be considered non-heritage properties. So some of the character defining elements of the whole area is a relatively small setback from the front property line, which kind of leads to this kind of continuous feel throughout the street, and as well as things like similar massing and similar height and peaked roofs kind of lend to kind of like this continuous cohesive grain feeling as you're walking along the street. The short setback, as well as lots of large front porches and covered entryways and lots of windows on front facades, also lends to kind of a feeling of neighborliness and a community feel to the street. So that's also one of the key character defining elements, as well as just, the standard kind of features of homes from this period. The homes on the street are not all the same style. There's a mix of styles, but a lot of those popular styles from the period, which is 1904 to 1929, have a lot of similarities. So things like bay windows, multi-light windows, decorative columns, corbelled brick chimneys, dormer windows, and things like that are replicated throughout all the homes despite these different styles, as well as those kind of bigger elements that I mentioned. So these are all the properties that are going to be considered or proposed to be considered heritage properties. As I said, 4 are designated, and the remaining 6 are not, but they will be added to the Heritage Register as part of this process. Like I said, the dates go from the first one was built in 1904 and the last in 1929, so that's our period we're considering here. And as you can see, while there are differences throughout them, and maybe not every property has every character-defining element, there's a lot of similarities that kind of lend that overall feel to the area, which is what we look for in heritage conservation areas, is that shared value as opposed to individual value. These are the properties that are going to be considered not heritage properties. As I said, one is the property with a 2 on it, so that's the 2527 Lewis. Either these properties are outside of the period we're dealing with, or they've been substantially altered so that they're no longer have those features we're talking about and no longer have that kind of authenticity. 44 Lewis isn't pictured because it's currently under construction, hopefully finished soon. It's been under construction for a while, but that is a new property and it won't be part of the heritage properties. So just quickly, it's kind of the principle for the guidelines for new buildings on the street, should any be brought forward. So this could be in the, those properties that aren't considered heritage properties. They could be replaced with another building, or there's also a parking lot that's included in the heritage conservation area, and that could be developed as well. Basically, kind of the principle of this is to continue that kind of that feel with the peaked roofs and short setbacks and that kind of community neighborliness feel with a lot of glazing and covered entries and that kind of thing, as well as keeping the material palette very similar. So kind of not stucco or cement or anything like that, but more like wood siding or shake siding and that kind of thing. So those are kind of the main principles of the guidelines. There's also guidelines for additions and alterations to the heritage buildings, which are pretty standard principle things based on the standards and guidelines. So any kind of addition or anything like that happening in the rear yard, preferably not visible from the streets, making sure that any replacement of elements is like for like or otherwise makes sense for the period and style of the building and things like that. So that was it for this. It's pretty high level. I can definitely pull up the guidelines if people have specific questions or comments about very specific things in them. I have them open. But that's it for my presentation on this. So over to the
Thank you,
panel.
Laura.